We're almost done, guys. Congratulations. Thanks for sticking it through. Thank you for coming to this talk. My name is Desi. I currently live in Pittsburgh, and I work at the Andy Warhol Museum. What I'm going to talk to you about today is totally unrelated to my job. It's a research, kind of like a little research project that I've been working on a personal level in conjunction with a friend, and I'm sharing with you today. I'm also going to be talking about things that are a little different from all the conversations that at least the ones I've been in, where we're talking a lot more about like organizational adaptation and getting buy-in from leaders, and actually I've ended up talking a lot about cultural production, cultural producers, artists, and their rights and things like that. But I hope you're interested. I hope you ask me some questions at the end. And a disclaimer also, I haven't actually done any projects with blockchain technology. I'm not a developer. I'm not a cryptography person, but I'm interested in the kind of the big picture implications of this particular technology on society and culture. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so what's the blockchain? Or rather, a blockchain. A blockchain is a distributed ledger system first used for and popularized by Bitcoin. That's probably where you've heard of it. And actually, here I'm putting the blockchain in quotes because you can have lots of blockchains. Blockchain is just one kind of underlying, or it's what underlines Bitcoin, but you can have other types of blockchains. And it's ultimately a new type of database, this distributed database, right? But it makes the implications kind of interesting. And this video, the first minute of it, does a better job than me at explaining it. So we're going to watch a little bit, and then we're going to delve into what that all means.
When you vote, have you ever wondered whether your ballot is actually counted? If you meet someone online, how do you know they're who they say they are? When you buy coffee that's labeled fair trade, what makes you so certain of its origin? To be sure, really sure, about any of those questions, you'd need a system where records could be stored, facts could be verified by anyone, and security is guaranteed. That way, no one could cheat the system by editing records, because everyone using the system would be watching. Systems like this are on the horizon, and the software that powers them is called a blockchain. Blockchains store information across a network of personal computers, making them not just decentralized, but distributed. This means no central company or person owns the system, yet everyone can use it and help run it. This is important because it means it's difficult for any one person to take down the network or corrupt it. The people who run the system use their computer to hold bundles of records submitted by others, known as blocks, in a chronological chain. The blockchain uses a form of math called cryptography to ensure that records can't be counterfeited or changed by anyone else.
All right, so we're going to stop right there. But the video, the narrator's starting to pull out kind of some of what people see as the benefits or what's really exciting about. Is that the next arrow? This is the next one. About this technology. They mentioned, of course, the distribution, the distributed structure makes it harder to take down with that great animation that's kind of showing the nodes as they disappear and then what happens to the system, which leads to kind of this big scary word called disintermediation. And when I heard it, I was like, what does that mean? But really, it's just a fancy word that means getting rid of the middleman. And that when you're using a blockchain for example, with Bitcoin on financial transactions, it means with Bitcoin, you no longer need a central bank, right? Or you don't need the U.S. Treasury, for example, to control that. And you're not using banks as kind of the clearinghouse for everything. So everyone's kind of sharing the responsibility of holding and verifying the data within that system. I'm not going to go too much deeper into the technology behind it. But another one of these kind of benefits is this layer of transparency that because all of the transactions are encoded, all like that great image with the Lego blocks, right? And everyone, it's distributing all those Lego blocks to everyone, right? Everyone's held accountable to everyone else. The blockchain technology is often talked about as being a trustless system because you don't need to require trust between individuals and organizations for it to run properly. The rules of trust are written into the system. Cool? So Bitcoin, most well-known example of blockchain out there. The blockchain technology allows, as I mentioned, the currency to run outside of a centralized treasury system. But there's a lot of stuff outside of just money, right? That people are starting to think about using blockchain technology for. And I'm going to give 2 examples, but there's a lot more out there. And then we're going to go into good stuff about culture. So one example is MedRec. It's a project that I just heard about recently, read some blog posts. They're thinking about how to improve our systems of medical records. Electronic medical records have been kind of a mess of incompatible backends, fragmented data trails, and they're thinking, what if we can have a medical record system shared across healthcare providers that's decentralized? So not just owned by one hospital or provider, right? And MedRec they're thinking of using a blockchain layer to act as an interface across these siloed health records. And there's an interesting added thing that they're doing, that the medical researchers have access to this like census level data. That means it's protecting individual personalized data, but acts like that, getting kind of aggregate level data to use for clinical research, which is kind of cool. There's the MIT Media Lab is thinking about how they have a project thinking about how to use it for credentialing. We're often rely on others to verify our credentials, whether that means like I'm applying for a job and they want my university transcript, or actually when I applied for grad school, they asked for my university transcript from undergrad, calling a former landlord to verify that their prospective tenant paid their rent on time, right? So they're thinking about how can we go to someone with our credentials and not have to use that other person to verify these things through something like the blockchain. In particular, they're thinking about things like online degrees, corporate and enterprise training, workforce development. So that's kind of another way. And there, a lot of people talk about kind of like smart contracts coming out of blockchain technology, which will kind of have an implication later. So what can blockchain technology mean for the cultural sector? On the one hand, we can think about how we can apply it to the needs of cultural institutions. On another hand, there are already artists out there who are probing at questions that arise out of it and thinking about how they can use it. Thinking about the previous example we saw, something like MedRec, you can imagine a kind of a worldwide decentralized database of cultural objects across institutions, right? We can think about how the blockchain can be used to record where our objects are, how they get passed from owner to owner, in other words, provenance throughout the course of its life. But actually, I'm going to now look at what's actually being done out there with the blockchain right now, rather than kind of this big speculative thing. If anyone was in the talk yesterday about incubators and accelerators, Nancy Proctor mentioned something about how she often looks to artists for inspiration for kind of pushing the boundaries of things, and I think there are some good examples that will arise. So in 2015, the MAK Vienna, Austria's Museum of Applied and Contemporary Arts, that became the first museum in the world to acquire what they call a decentrally authenticated digital artwork using digital currency. And they bought an artwork called Event Listeners by a Dutch artist named Harm van den Dorpel using BitCoin. I'm going to play this while I talk. This is just a screen grab of his work. Event Listeners is he's creating generating a screensaver algorithmically, and the artist has said about screensavers that nowadays screensavers do not have to protect screens anymore, as the quality of technology of digital screens has significantly improved. As in, like, screensavers were these things that would protect from burning an image, searing an image onto a computer screen. Our computer screens no longer are pretty good, so they don't do that. So he's saying that screensavers are completely useless, so they should exist in the same space as art. And so one thing I like about this work, is it running? Yeah. Okay. Cool. It's just it's so slow, right? So one thing I like about this artwork, and the fact that it was kind of sold through Bitcoin, is that it's an artwork that's never the same. That's always changing. This is a screen grab, but this is not what you would see if you were to view it at the museum. But at the same time, and it's a response, right, to something digital being physically burned onto something, but at the same time as our creations are becoming more intangible like this, we are using systems like the blockchain to kind of fix them, to make them, to authenticate them, to be able to sell them, right? But it's not through a kind of a central controlling force, like say a cultural institution, but through this distributed network, right? So this is an example, that's an example of a cultural institution participating in the digital currency. But one of the big promises, as I mentioned, of blockchain is to get away from the centralized institutions and empowering individuals. So another project that I want to look at is looking at kind of like, creating new business models for individual artists. And that's something that artist Sarah Mayo, I think it's pronounced Mayohas, she's explored in a project called BitchCoin. In this project, rather than using Bitcoin or existing currency, she created her own. And BitchCoin is a digital currency with a fixed exchange rate. It's 1 BitchCoin to 25 square inches of photographic print. If the value of her photograph increases, so will the value of the coin. But the US dollars to coin, wait, hold on. If the value, yeah, exactly. So the US dollars to coin will change, but the 1 BitchCoin to 25 inches rate does not change. It took me a while to get that. And what this does is it allows art collectors, what she says it's doing is allowing art collectors to invest directly in her as an artist rather than in one particular object that she's created, at least at the outset. So they buy the currency at its current value, and then the currency serves as credit for work that hasn't been produced yet. They can at any moment exchange their coins for photographic prints, but it could be that you buy a coin, like when she started this project in 2014, and 5 years later decide to buy something she just produced at that moment. So every time a new BitchCoin is released, so AKA purchased by a collector, the artist is literally putting aside an unframed archival chromogenic print in a bank vault like this one. This is the first one she put into a vault. And it's kind of like the gold standard of yore. She's linking the currency to a physical asset. So in a way, BitchCoin is the artist taking a bit of ownership of the art market. She said to Art News, the online publication, in an email, BitchCoin gives me a level of control over future value production that most artists without their currency don't have access to. So I thought that was pretty cool. Another project that's also thinking about the rights and compensation for cultural producers is Monograph, spelled with an E. It's going about it at a different way. Monograph is a startup. It was first conceived by artist Kevin McCoy and kind of writer, entrepreneur, thinker Anil Dash during Rhizome's 7-on-7 summit a few years ago. And they pair artists and technologies to come up with new ideas. And after 7-on-7, the project has since been kind of enveloped into the New Museum's New Ink incubator. And Monograph provides tools for creators to license their media for commercial or editorial use. The name they chose is kind of a pun on the art term monograph, right? But also they thought it was a funny tongue-in-cheek portmanteau of monetized and graphics. And the project came from, Kevin McCoy works and makes digital works, and he's long been thinking about the tension for digital artists, or artists working in a digital way, between wanting to promote yourself by giving your work away freely on the web, but also wanting to get compensated for your work. And he used the phrase in one kind of interview that digital art is often treated as worthless, but really it does have value, and how do we measure that? So what Monograph has done is create a process for establishing verification and provenance, so the chain of ownership of digital files. And it's an online community and platform. You can go create an account. I did that and went through kind of the process that you can use to distribute your work. If you sign up for an account, it'll walk you through these steps. It's actually kind of beautifully designed. And the often complex distinctions and licenses in the whole process lets artists set the parameters for licensing and the ownership of the work. And underlying this, they're doing this on top of Namecoin, which is another digital currency. So while BitchCoin empowered one particular artist to have control over her future value production, they're thinking about Born Digital works kind of across the board. And I'm actually going to play, if I have enough time, someone stop me, let me know if we're running low on time, because I know we started a bit late. I want to play like a minute of, oh no, you know what? This is in Vimeo, so I had to put it in a separate window. I'm going to play a little bit of this. It's just kind of the people in the company talking about what Monograph is.
And it's pretty common for artists to lose control of the work that they're making, to feel like it's gotten out of their grasp, it's online. For an artist, those issues of knowing that you made this and being able to show people, that's important.
We see Monograph as offering creators a new deal, where we have your interest in mind. Because we are creators, we are makers, we are in the same boat together.
It's saying to them,
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I want to get to a certain point.
We know who owns this work, and we
people to not only see that it's your work, but also what it is that they can do with your work.
So between being very private, which we call very stealth, to being very public, each one has its value and depends on the circumstances.
For an artist with Monograph, there's really no downside. Why wouldn't you want to register your work? Why wouldn't you want to state publicly, I made this?
So I'm going to stop it right there, and that's the part I wanted to get to. That was Kevin McCoy saying there's no downside, which is where I beg to differ. Let's see if I can get my notes back. Are you going to see my notes?
You want to click in the middle of the presenter view?
No, that's actually different, I found out. I think so. Hold on, I got it though. I'm good. Great. Cool. So it's funny, the video gets really cheesy, right? Like kind of inspirational music about like artists and now we can make money and whatever, we're being valued. But he does end on this statement on like, why wouldn't you want to publish your work? And I don't think that's true for a lot of artists. Rachel O'Dwyer spoke at the New Museum in 2015 about, she's kind of a researcher in this field, and she brought up a few implications of what a few concerns about what this might mean to digital art. And one is, do we want necessarily digital art to be commoditized? I mean, one thing that we talk about a lot is the free sharing, right? And since the 1960s, artists have been thinking about how to resist commoditization, working outside a capitalist system. A lot of digital art is about the irreverence of cultural property, of making culture property, right? She's also concerned about IP. Is it going to be producing stronger IP laws around digital files? Will we be, is the legal world going to be thinking about now how do we build digital rights management right into digital files, and is that the kind of world we want? And then a great question she poses is who benefits from using, from the blockchain, right? We are presenting this as a solution to empower artists, which is allowing them to take the reins over their, the kind of how their work is sold. Do artists even want to delve into these specifics? What happens to things like gallerists or artists' rights managers, right? And then if going back to kind of blockchain in the financial sector, to cryptocurrencies and whatnot, smart contracts, we're seeing banks, we're seeing people or organizations like IBM and so on starting to experiment with the blockchain. So is it going to go the way of like Airbnb, which is touted as empowering individuals to rent their apartment for the weekend to make an extra buck, when really we're now starting to see cities where Airbnb is, managed primarily by like bigger property management companies. So those are some implications. A few more. Those are the concerns more for digital artists using blockchain, and I want to go back to kind of the earlier suggestion I had made about cultural institutions, about creating kind of this decentralized database of museum objects. There's a lot of hype in blockchain circles about how blockchain can be used for social good. And one example that's kind of talked about a lot is land rights disputes, especially in developing countries. So they're saying that instead of using paper-based processes, the blockchain could enable the government to register digital titles for land that can't be easily duplicated or changed. It means greater accountability, and so on. And we can kind of see it like maybe a parallel something or other happening in terms of tracking provenance of artworks or objects, cultural objects, tracking the passage of ownership of these works over time. Some colleagues of mine from MIT wrote this article in The Atlantic recently, going back to kind of the land rights thing, right? They wrote an article debunking the attitude about land rights or the argument about that. They're saying that, here's a long quote, ready? By using the blockchain to solve land title problems rests on a shallow, incomplete understanding of the challenge at hand. The complexities of how land titles are managed in developing countries is the result of long-standing conflicts between grassroots communities, their governments, and large multinational corporations. By assuming the problem is mainly about bureaucratic inefficiencies and paper-based processes, Bitcoin enthusiasts ignore the hardest part of the situation, long-standing conflicts over rights and power. So that got really heavy, but it's important. I think it's important to keep in mind for the cultural sector if we do say we're going to talk about this for things like repatriation of objects, right, or provenance. It's important to recognize that we're inscribing into the technology. What we're inscribing to the technology is only as good as our understanding of the social and political issues surrounding it. So I'd like to return to a little bit more lighthearted note, and actually this is. Again, Kevin McCoy and then Anil Dash on the side. I think it was a little unfair to Kevin McCoy earlier when I said like, not all artists want to. There is a downside, right? Not all artists necessarily want to do this. And they've been thinking about these things. When they first got together and conceived of Monograph, they were really excited about the ideas, but posed a lot of, published online a lot of critical questions that they were thinking about. Similar ones that I brought up earlier, right? The intellectual property, how might intellectual property law change or be improved in response? How do we deal with derivative artworks, right, in something like Monograph? My favorite question of theirs was, assuming that blockchains are as secure as they appear to be, what can we do to enable art heists? So that's it. Thanks, guys. So we probably have to swap some of it. Oh, I won't do that. I have a minute. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about how there are examples of artists intermediating. They're like Thomas Kincaid, right? Like he controlled his output. And I wondered if there was, and not always, there's a secondary market, right? And so I wondered about, did they mention a secondary market for BitchCoin? Like how do you sell BitchCoin to other collectors?
That's amazing. I did not read anything about a secondary market for BitchCoin. I haven't heard about that, but I wonder. I mean, I guess my assumption is that there cannot be, but I would love there to be. I don't know. There's something funny about, and that's the art heist comment as well. Is obviously we don't actually want art heists to happen, but they have a place in our cultural I don't know, in the zeitgeist, right? That we talk about art heists and everyone gets really intrigued by them, and that in some ways we don't necessarily want all these things to go away, right? And such a clean solution seems impossible and maybe a little less fun. Cool, thanks guys.